Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on a massive cellular mystery that affects literally hundreds of millions of people all over the planet. I'm talking about insulin resistance. We're going to treat this whole thing like a microscopic crime scene. We'll track down exactly how our cellular machinery breaks down. And, most importantly, we're going to look at the cutting-edge science on how we might actually fix it. It's an absolutely incredible biological detective story, so let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this. The World Health Organization just has this staggering projection. They expect the global prevalence of diabetes to hit 700 million cases by 2045. 700 million! That's mind-blowing. And the primary driver? Obesity. Actually, obese individuals are up to 80 times more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. But, to truly stop this global health emergency, we have to look way past the symptoms. We really need to understand the molecular malfunction at the very center of it all.
So here's our roadmap for the investigation today. First, the evolutionary paradox. Second, normal operations versus dysfunction. Third, the true culprit, ectopic fat. Fourth, ruling out other suspects. And finally, number 5, rethinking our treatment strategy. And hey, don't worry if the molecular biology sounds a bit intimidating. We are going to break this down step by step so it makes perfect sense.
Section 1. The evolutionary paradox, survival turns sabotage. Our investigation begins with a really fundamental question. Why is the exact mechanism that evolution designed to keep us alive now causing a massive global health crisis?
Well, think about it. For most of human history, evolution built us to survive nutrient scarcity. Whenever we actually found food, our bodies needed a super efficient way to shift from producing energy to storing it away for the inevitable famine. And insulin? Insulin is the pivotal master regulator of that transition. It's the hormone yelling, hey, we have food, store the fuel. But today, in our modern world of constant nutrient surplus and, let's face it, pretty sedentary lifestyles, that ancient survival system is just completely overwhelmed. The famine never comes, and the storage system just breaks.
So the crucial point we really need to understand is this shared baseline. Insulin resistance happens when your body's tissues just stop listening to insulin. Well before your blood sugar ever spikes to diabetic levels, your cells basically start ghosting the insulin signal. And because the tissues aren't responding, your poor pancreas has to pump out more and more insulin just to maintain baseline operations. This creates a state of hyperinsulinemia. Eventually, the pancreas just totally exhausts itself, and that's what leads to type 2 diabetes. Section 2. Normal operations and dysfunction, the crime scene. To figure out how this system breaks, we first need to know what a healthy metabolic warehouse looks like when things are running smoothly.
Normally, insulin acts like a master key. In your skeletal muscle, which, by the way, handles up to 80% of your glucose disposal, insulin perfectly unlocks the doors, so glucose can rush in and be used for energy. Over in your liver, insulin gives the strict command to stop producing new sugar. And in your adipose tissue, your fat cells, insulin stops the breakdown of fat. It essentially locks all that stored energy safely away in the vault.
But here's where we hit a massive aha moment in our investigation. It's a wildly fascinating phenomenon called selective insulin resistance. See, when the liver becomes insulin resistant, it doesn't break down completely. It actually only breaks partially. The liver totally ignores insulin's command to stop making sugar, so it just keeps pumping glucose into your bloodstream. But tragically, it still perfectly obeys insulin's command to make fat. It's this vicious, broken loop that leads directly to high blood sugar, high blood lipids, and fatty liver disease.
Section 3, the culprit, ectopic fat accumulation. Okay, so what actually jams the lock? What's causing this selective breakdown? This brings us to a huge breakthrough in our molecular investigation, where we uncovered the true mastermind.
It all really comes down to a warehouse metaphor. Your adipose tissue, your fat cells, are the designated custom-built warehouses for lipid storage. That is their literal job. But when we are constantly overnourished, that primary warehouse gets totally full. So what does the body do? Well, it starts desperately shoving dangerous boxes of lipids into the hallways and offices of places they absolutely don't belong, specifically the liver and the skeletal muscle. We call this ectopic fat accumulation, and it causes a total disruption of the daily operations inside those cells.
Now, what's really interesting about the molecular crime scene is how this happens. When fat gets crammed into the liver and muscle, it forms a very specific lipid intermediate called DAG, or diacylglycerol. Think of DAG as our mastermind. DAG activates a family of proteins called PKC, specifically novel PKC epsilon in the liver and PKC theta in the muscle. And this PKC protein, it physically alters the insulin receptor. It literally jams the lock from the inside. So even when insulin binds to the outside of the cell perfectly, the door just won't open.
But the detail here is absolutely crucial. It's not just having fat in the cell that causes the problem, it's the specific type and the exact location of that fat. Research shows that only specific stereoisomers like SNAO-1,2-DAG hovering right at the plasma membrane of the cell are actually guilty of activating PKC and causing insulin resistance. If the fat is safely tucked away in a lipid droplet deeper inside the cell, insulin signaling works just fine. It's all about having the exact wrong fat molecule in the exact wrong subcellular location.
Section 4. Other suspects and theories, ruling out the accomplices. So DAG is definitely our prime suspect. But, in the scientific community, we always have to ask, what about the other usual suspects we're always hearing about? For years, researchers have dug into other potential pathways for insulin resistance. Things like endoplasmic reticulum, or ER stress, reactive oxygen species, also known as ROS, and chronic systemic inflammation driven by macrophages in the fat tissue. And let's be clear, they are absolutely present at the scene of the crime.
But here is the really critical distinction. These are secondary suspects. While inflammation and cellular stress are for sure present in obese and diabetic states, genetic experiments have proven that knocking them out in lab models doesn't always fix the core insulin resistance. For example, simply reducing inflammation doesn't magically unjam the insulin receptor if that ectopic fat is still sitting there. This proves they're accomplices. They might make a bad situation worse, but they aren't the root cause pulling the trigger. The ectopic fat accumulation is.
Section 5. Rethinking the treatment strategy. Fixing the locks. So, if we know the true culprit, how does that change the entire way we fight the disease? Let's rethink our treatment strategy.
When we look at the clinical landscape, there is this massive disconnect between how we currently treat type 2 diabetes and where the cutting-edge science is actually heading. Right now, the vast majority of our strategies are entirely focused on treating the symptoms of a broken system, rather than fixing the root cause of the metabolic breakdown itself. Take current drugs, for example. Hallmark medications like sulfonylureas basically just force the pancreas to shout louder by secreting even more insulin. Or SGLT2 inhibitors. They literally force your kidneys to just pee out the excess sugar. Don't get me wrong, they manage the symptoms brilliantly, but they don't fix the jammed lock. The future of medicine, however, is targeting the root cause. We're looking at experimental drugs like ACC and DGA2 inhibitors that actually stop the liver from synthesizing that toxic fat in the first place. Or other therapies, like myostatin inhibitors, being designed to increase muscle mass, forcing the skeletal muscle to burn away the fat that's blocking up the hallways. We're finally moving toward therapies that genuinely repair the cellular machinery. By understanding that type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance are fundamentally driven by ectopic fat jamming the molecular locks of our cells, we really unlock an entirely new frontier of medicine. So as science shifts away from simply managing the overflow of blood sugar to actually clearing out the fat and targeting the root cause, we have to ask, are we finally on the verge of reversing the metabolic epidemic? It's an incredibly exciting time for metabolic health, and understanding these cellular mechanics really puts the power of knowledge back in your hands. Thanks so much for joining me on this investigation, and keep questioning how things work at the deepest levels.